Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hey, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. I haven't been on in a few weeks, and I'm anxious to get back into the education of astrology with you. Today we're going to be talking about aspects. Aspects are a word that we use in astrology to determine and to discuss and to describe the relationship between the planets in anyone's chart. That sounds like a mouthful, and I'll go through it very carefully and try to explain it to you as best I can. As you know, as you can see from the screen here, let me just make this a little bit larger for you. The geometry is the basis for astrology. So with that in mind, you've got to understand everything has to do with geometry. Geometry is about circles, it's about angles, it's about lines, it's about anything that has to do with geometry is really what the basis for astrology comes down to. And in that structure, as you can see in the chart here, we have an unknown person, and you can see that the chart is faced up like this. We have all the signs around the outside, and this chart's going to vary depending upon whose chart it is. This is just a random number I brought up to illustrate my points. So you'll see that what we're looking at here is a chart of an individual. Obviously, they're born on April 1st, 1952 at 4:31 p.m. in Connecticut, and this is the chart that this person has. And when we see a chart like this and we see planets all over the place, some charts do not look like this. Some charts have planets in much different clusters depending upon where you were born, when you were born, and all the other things, and depending upon what was happening in the universe at the time that you were born. So these planets are all in certain signs. So when I do a reading for somebody, or I'm talking to somebody, I'd say, oh, you've got Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter in Aries, which is right over here. You can see that piece right there. It's very clear. And then over here we say, oh, you've got Moon and Uranus in Cancer, which you can see right here. And then down here you've got Saturn and Neptune in Libra. That's right there. So what happens in this situation, and because the wheel is set up like this, each sign has an opposing sign as well. So over here with the mouse, as you can see the cursor right there, that's Aries. The opposite of Aries, which is a fire sign, is over here, which is Libra, right down here. So those are exactly opposite each other. That is a 180-degree angle, and that's called an aspect. When we look at another angle, we can see these lines in between here. We see the sun here at 12 degrees, and up here we see Uranus at 9 degrees, and we see a line that runs from here to there. That's called a square. That's a 90-degree angle. So these angles in astrology all have great meaning, and this is how the whole aspect works. And this is why they're called aspects, because it represents the relationship of one planet to another planet. That's why it's very important to understand this whole concept, because without this one concept, you really can't understand astrology. And that's been my goal here, is to try to help educate you into astrology so you understand the rationale and the logic of how it works, because it really is fairly complex and a little bit obtuse, to be honest. It's kind of an unusual construct, but this is how it works. Because when it was first discovered and they first devised the system, we're looking out from the Earth to the sky, and we see a gigantic dome around us, and that dome continues. So we are living in a circular realm of our purview. Our vision is in this gigantic circle. And so the chart represents that in what's called heliocentric astrology, meaning helio means the earth-centered astrology. And that's what we're looking at here. The idea here is that the angles between planets in an individual chart, as we see right here, whatever those angles may be, and I'll get into this discussion as we get further down the road, have to do with the theme of what is being represented by those planets. So to illustrate that, let's talk about it this way. So we have the sun over here at 12 degrees. You can see it right there where the cursor is, at 12 degrees Aries. And then over here we have a Uranus at almost 10 degrees Cancer. So that's within they're close enough by degree to warrant a story to be told about those kind of people, about those kind of aspects, personality traits. Because each of the planets represents a personality trait depending upon the house it's in, the sign that it's in. Those are all characteristics which color the aspect of the astrology and which color the individual ultimately. So this is how we have to interpret our charts. We look at these planets, we look at the houses, we look at the signs, and we look at the way they are aspected to each other. In other words, the relationship between planet to planet is how we get the story. Because astrology really is a series of stories. And when astrologer does a reading, such as myself, and I do a reading for you, or if you contact me at my website, chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com, you will see that I can offer this kind of insight to you, and I can provide you with lessons on how to learn astrology if you're interested in it, but you can find a lot about it on the web as well. There's no question about that. However, the most important piece here is that there has to be a degree of connection. So you know, if this was 12 degrees and this was 12 degrees, it would be an exact, it's called partile. But when you're off a little bit like this, and we typically allow a range of terms for depending upon the planets. Now, the sun, there's typically, I usually go with what's called a 6-degree differential, or the word that we use in astrology is orb, O-R-B. The orb is the difference between one planet's degrees and the other planet's degrees. So the reason that becomes complicated for people is because the idea is you want to be within 6 degrees of connection. Obviously, the closer they are, the more intense they're going to be, and as they get further away from each other, the influence tends to dissipate. So if the planets represent a theme, like if the sun represents the ego in the individual, and Uranus, in this case, represents the sort of the wild and the rebellion and the innovative and the novel, you could say this person has an unusual relationship because it's a square. There's tension there between their relationship and their career. So this is an interesting thing to see. This is how this all works down. Now I'm going to show you a series of different what they're called aspects. I'm going to show you the aspects on a chart that I have here behind this screen, and we'll bring that up for you to see, and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. And this, as I said, it's all about mathematical and geometrical connection. It's mathematical geometrical connection by degree. Now, those of you who are not fond of math, and I'm one of them, you need not be afraid of this because this is very logical in its format and its construct. We can see how this works. So the very first one we see is a conjunction. That's at 0 degrees. A conjunction would be something like we see right here. We'd see this right here, this area, we see this is a conjunction because the two planets are close to each other. This is called a stellium because there's more than 3. But when we have planets that are together, they have added impact. They each sort of help each other. As a matter of fact, I can read you the official definition here. It's a harmonious aspect. It's a quality that depends greatly on the planets involved as well as how close the aspect is. For example, a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury is generally regarded as harmonious. However, the distance between them is less than a few degrees. Mercury is said to be not as effective in that case. So when we go back to the chart I was showing you, we see that this is Mercury right here, and this is the Sun right here. This is 12 degrees, this is 18 degrees. They're just at the border of what that 6-degree orb is. So they have influence on each other, but it's more important. The aspect is less important in this case than it is up here when we only have 3 degrees. So you see, the smaller the number of degrees when the planets are close in proximity, the greater the accuracy and the more potent the impact will be, or the flavor will be, or the characteristic of the individual's personality trait will be more intense and more highly defined by that. In this particular case, in the 10th house, we talked about the houses back a while ago, and maybe you have to go through and review your old Turning of the Wheel episodes to get that, but that's okay. The 10th house in this case is the house of career. So we have the moon at 6 degrees, or almost 7 degrees Cancer, and we have Uranus at 9, almost 10 degrees Cancer. So this indicates, when you put those two together in the 10th house, this indicates a person who has a desire to be, and uses his emotions or her emotions to express their unusual characteristic, unusual traits. This is a person with an unusual job, using their emotions to get it across. More than likely, this is an astrologer or somebody who does astrology or knows astrology very well because of that connection. There's a certain sense of eccentricity with Uranus, and being an astrologer is not your average run-of-the-mill job. It's not a plumber or a carpenter or a banker. It's an astrologer. So some people go to astrologers, not as many as we'd like to have, but nonetheless, it's not a very popular job, so therefore it makes itself unusual by comparison in that regard. So In that capacity, that's called, they are conjunct. We'd call that conjunct, even though they're not exactly on top of each other. They're close enough because there's that orb. And that's good for 6 degrees, generally speaking. Some astrologers have different orbs. Many people prefer a tighter orb, but this is sort of the de facto standard that we go to. We typically go to the 6 degrees as the maximum. It will be a lesser influence than those of a person who had, a complete conjunction where you had, 2 planets at the same degree, or in 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 degrees. Those are closer, so there's a more pungency, there's a more profound impact of what that would be like at that point in time. That's an important distinction. So that's the conjunction. The next one we go to is called the opposition. And the opposition is 180 degrees. Now, every sign in astrology, because it's on a wheel, as I showed you earlier, because it's on a wheel, every one of them has the ability to be opposite each other. So in the case of Aries, as I mentioned here, Aries is opposite Libra, which makes perfect sense because Aries is a fire sign. The opposite is the air sign because fire feeds air, air feeds fire. In the case of, and that's always going to be the case. In the case of Taurus, opposite is Scorpio because Taurus is earth, Scorpio's water. In the case of Gemini, Gemini is an air sign, and exactly opposite is a fire sign, which is Sagittarius. Cancer is a water sign. Opposite Cancer is Capricorn, an earth sign. And then in Leo is a fire sign. Opposite it is air sign Aquarius, which is an air sign. And then when we get down to the Virgo is an earth sign, and the opposite of Virgo is a water sign, Pisces. That just gives you the idea of the opposition. So I want to get back to that chart on the screen here so you can see what I'm talking about and get that into a greater picture. So the opposition is 180 degrees. Opposition are generally considered to be just that. Since they oppose each other, they tend to be disharmonious or dynamic. It often has a bit of a motivating or energizing effect. I personally think, as an astrologer, that the opposite is a way of filling in the characteristics that you don't have yourself. So, if an Aries person is in love with a Libra person, the Libra person would bring to the Aries person things that Aries person needed to sort of fulfill out his profile, just as the Libra person would need the Aries person, the fire person, to sort of fill out their idea of it. And sometimes that's where the old phrase of opposites attract comes from, and it's very accurate there. The square is a 90-degree angle, and I'll show you what that looks like. We saw that earlier in the chart. When we saw the square here, we have a square here from Saturn at 11 degrees up to Uranus at 10 degrees there, and that line is right there. You can see that line running. That's considered a square. A square in astrology is considered to be a challenging aspect. When you have 2 planets that are square to each other, they are there to sort of help educate each other. And I know this sounds a little bit odd, but it's regarded as a challenging aspect, or what they call disharmonious, meaning that it's not an easy walk in the park for that individual, largely because the square is just like, think of the square as climbing the stairs. When you climb the stairs, you go up and you go across. You go up and you go across. That is a 90-degree angle there, just like you'd see in any corner of your house or your room, wherever there's a 90-degree angle, like right here even, or here, or anywhere there's a 90-degree angle. Those are considered to be challenging. But those are also put there to help you rise up. It's the squares in the chart that make people rise to their greatest potential. So when we look at that chart again, and we see what they have in the way of squares, we see quite a bit of squares going on in the middle there. We have a square here, we got a square here, we got a square here. We got all these squares in there, all of which point to a person who has difficult lessons to learn or challenges to overcome in their lives. Not everybody has this. We all have squares in our chart somewhere, but not everybody has this immensity of squares. This is a particularly challenging chart because there's a lot of squares there. Meaning that as this person goes through life from birth to death, they are going to be faced with challenges at different times of their time in their lives that they have to overcome in order to sort of fulfill their real true destiny. This is what it's all about. The real true destiny comes down to working their way up these challenges. And the challenges are there in many regards. I think that the squares are basically your best friends because of the simple fact that without the squares, you would not rise to that challenge. You'd just stay in bed all day. But the squares are what gets you out of bed. They're what make you move. They're what make you get things done. They are the great challenges in everyone's lives, whether that comes through relationship, and this is really critical when it comes down to relationships, because you take two people's charts, you put them together, and you can see where the difficulties arise, and that is how you can find out if the person is your person or not. Oftentimes, we fall in love with people because we're attracted to them, or there's a spark, or there's a chemistry, and oftentimes that wears off over time because what looked good at the beginning may have been a precursor or an indicator of what could be going wrong down the road. So it's important to understand that. When we see all of this activity here, we also are going to see something in here we'll refer to those are the blue lines. Those are going to be what's called the trines. I'll get back to that over here. So we looked at the next one. We look at the square. I talked briefly about the square. It is a disharmonious, and it's considered to be blocked, or it is a challenge that needs to be met. The problems that arise from the square keep on turning up, unlike a bad penny or a bad dream. So your challenge is to accomplish that until you have mastered that. Not everybody masters everything in their lives, but it is a chance for you to at least try to get to a point where you can see the challenges and how to rise to them, how to make it work, how to better yourself. And if you don't solve the problems, they're going to keep recurring. So this is why it's important to talk to someone like myself, an astrologer, to find out where your challenges are. The astrology chart is a composite of our assets and our liabilities. In other words, our gifts are there, but our challenges are there too. We all have this. Every person has challenges and every person has assets. This is why some people are better at what they do than others. And other people may try to do things and they find that they can't do it. But this is what the logic of astrology is all about. The square. What you're trying to do in this case is you're trying to find a reconciliation for how to meld or how to merge those two contexts, those two attributes together so that they do make sense and they do serve you better overall. Now, those are the first three we've talked about. The conjunction is harmonious at 0 degrees when the planets are right together, as we saw in that last chart. Over here we have this conjunction right up here at the top where you see that blue and the moon right there. That's a conjunction. That's considered to be harmonious or easy. When we go back to the chart here, we see the opposition. Those are the planets on the opposite ends of the wheel. And that's the same for everyone. Every sign out there, no matter who you are, you have an opposite person. You also have a person who you can be more harmonious with, but this is the case of the oppositions. The oppositions are always going to be opposite the elements. And if you know the elements, as we've talked about before in the past, then you'll know what your opposite is. Fire is opposite air. Water is opposite earth. And you can see why that works, because fire feeds air feeds fire rather, and water and earth mix together. Okay, so that's very important. Now we get down to what's called the more harmonious aspects, and we see what's called the trine. The trine is 120 degrees, and it's called a trine because it looks like a triangle. Okay, the trines are where we find the harmony in the chart or the ease of use. This is sort of where people have a natural talent. This is where you'd find someone who just woke up or arrived on the planet, and because they had harmonious aspects, this is going to be an area of life where they would be blessed or would be easily served. They didn't have to work hard at this. This is a very important piece. Didn't have to work hard at that. And in this case, we see, here's Mars down here at 18 degrees Scorpio, and here we have Venus over here at 20 degrees Pisces. That is considered to be a trine because they're within 2 degree orbs. Another case, we would run the trine up to the Cancer up here at 9 degrees. That's a little bit wide, so really couldn't do it. But that does give you the idea that between Mars and Venus in this case, we have that trine, and that's considered to be a water trine because it's in 2 water signs. An interesting point to note here is that if you're in a square, you are always facing an opposing element or an opposing modality. And that's what's most important. So when we look at a square, we say, okay, well, here's a cardinal fire sign, and here's a cardinal water sign. Water and fire don't mix, so there's the challenge. Here we see a cardinal water sign. Here we see a cardinal air sign. The air and the water don't mix. That's where the challenge comes from. Here we see a cardinal air sign, and down here we see a cardinal earth sign. There's a square there because there's air and earth don't match. That's the challenge. That's the square. The trine, as I mentioned earlier, the trine is the one where they do match by element, by elemental discovery. So in that case, we would see fire to fire, air to air, earth to earth, or water to water. So there's three signs in each of those four elements, and that makes the number 12. When you put those together, it's the earth to earth, water to water, fire to fire, air to air that work, or the fire to air, earth to water that works. This is where we find harmony. So the trine is 120 degrees, and we can see that in the form of a triangle. As I go back to this chart once again, we'll see this is considered to be a trine right there because it's 120 degrees apart on the great 360 degree wheel. Now, you know that the earth is the 360 degrees, and this whole wheel will turn throughout the course of any day. And we'll be getting that into the next segment when we talk about transits, which is even another layer of complexity to astrology. But if you're really interested in learning about this, this is a fascinating way to learn about astrology. And you can come to very quick observations about people without a whole lot of information. You can come up with this mathematical permutations, and you can see how they work. They work very clearly together, and it's obvious when you see this. Now, oftentimes, especially when it comes to Venus and Mars, people may meet and they may have their planets may be squared to each other, but with Mars and Venus together, there is a definite spark there, and that challenge of that spark is what drives the passion. Is it sustainable? More than likely, no. But it does set off the stage to begin with, which is why some people fall in love with people who they are in this construct with. And then when they do that, at first the passion's great, but is it the sort of thing that's sustainable? Is it a relationship that's going to endure hardship and hard times? Sometimes they do. And a lot of this is generational too, don't forget. You know, our parents probably put up with a lot more in the way of disharmony in their lives because they didn't want to be shamed into divorce, which had a real stigma when we were younger. At least for me it did. People didn't want to get divorced because it would look bad on them. It would show something about them, and it just was considered to be sort of a social, you know, there was a social stigma attached to it. But if you go back and you find these charts, or you go back through your own experience with your parents, if your parents, you can look at your parents, were they aligned properly based on their birthdays? And if so, did they get along well? I mean, every relationship has has times when people argue and fight over things, money and housing and daycare and child rearing. All those are hot topics, and people could get into discussion over that. But the difference is you'll find the marriages that have the greatest harmony in them are those that last the longest. There may be challenges in there, yes, but if they can overcome the challenges as a couple, they can get through it all, and they can create a marvelous union, and out of that springs a new family and love and all that. But I'm saying much can be determined. Matter of fact, as an astrologer, one of the most common questions I get asked is, can you tell me if I'm suitable for my boyfriend? Or can you tell me if I'm suitable for my girlfriend? Or should I move? Or what kind of job should I get? All of these things are clearly indicated by the astrology chart, which is why I've always been a strong proponent of bringing astrology into the career counseling centers in the high schools and the public school systems. Because if there was a practiced astrologer who could look at a person's chart based on their birth date, place, and time, they could determine the best occupation for this person, the best way, what their challenges were, what their assets were, and it's in those challenges and assets, and we all have them. There's not a single person on the earth who doesn't have an asset and liability. I use the word liability for a challenge because it is kind of a liability. You know, if you're cursed with a certain personality trait that doesn't allow you to move forward or stunts you in some way, that's going to hold you back. Your challenge is to rise above that. All of us are faced with challenges. We lose people in our lives, we have car accidents, we get fired, we break up. But then there's also just as much joy. Babies arrive, we get new jobs, we get promotions, we buy houses, we buy things, we have friends, we have family. There's a lot to be said for both. But it is a mixed bag of both, and you can understand that. So I want to just go through this one more time, and then finally we have one more aspect I want to talk about, which is the sextile, which is also considered to be harmonious. It has to do more with the idea. It's this very bottom one right here. You can see it's got 60 degrees. So trine and sextile are considered to be harmonious, meaning they're easy aspects. But the 60 degrees is between two signs of different elements. So there'd be a fire and an air. So Aries to Gemini would be a 60-degree angle, depending upon that alignment. And in that, those are more of a bridging. That's more of a sort of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, where they both bring something to the ultimate formula that makes it the final product good. So it's a supportive kind of a bridging effect between two different things. But because they are in complementary elemental mode, because fire and air, or water and earth together, they would make that work. So let's just go back to the chart, and we'll go through this quickly to review that this is a 360-degree wheel. In here we have angles of all sorts. We have squares. Right there, you can see the squares. If you took a protractor or a ruler or an L ruler and put it on there, you would see all these different angles. And it's the angles that determine the intensity of the individuals. And you can see this with famous people. You can see with people that you know and love. You can see with all this. These are very, very true and incredibly accurate because they work so well together. This person, as I said over here, has this conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter. This person probably likes to talk about metaphysical topics or who knows what, spiritual topics, or is interested in that sort of thing. Having Jupiter there means there's a certain abundance, a certain amplification of this theme there. So there's quite a bit to be said there. So in this case, the red lines are the squares, and the blue lines are the trines, and there's other lines in here too. This chart isn't particularly set up that way, but you can see a sextile here between, we have one here between this planet at 20 degrees, which is Neptune, up to, I'll follow the line up right here, up to Pluto at 19 degrees. This is a 19-degree fire sign. This is a 20-degree air sign. So they're very close. The orb is, in that case, is closer, only 1 degree difference between the two of them. So there's obviously going to be a natural inclination there. Another example of a trine would be this Mercury over here at 18 degrees in Aries fire, going across to this Pluto at 19 degrees in Leo fire. So fire to fire. Again, the trine. And if this came down further down to another one down here, the other fire sign, Sagittarius, we would have seen that as well. But we don't see that. This is the lot of fortune, which is something altogether different. We're not going to talk about that today. But anyway, and we see, again, I'll reiterate this. Here's a Mercury, here's a Mars, and here's a Venus. They are both in water signs, and they're both in close degree, so they're very accurate and very precise, and that's a harmonious, easy to get along with aspect. So astrology is a construct of geometry at its core, and the logic of the universe and the planets. And the logic of the universe and the planets really is about mathematics at the end of the day. So the fact that this is a mathematical construct shouldn't come as any surprise. As these things line up, or as they don't line up, the personality of this individual is revealed. And each of us has a different set of challenges and aspects. Even twins, and I'm the father of twins, even twins have different charts, and they experience life differently because of their outlook. But they start out with certain core personality attributes that allow them to sort of exist in the same world. They have similarities to them, very strong similarities, because they of their personality types. But life's influence on them, because they each go through life a different way, you can't stay attached forever, imbues them with a different flavor of their outlook on life is different. And people can come out of that in many different ways based on a number of things. So it's important to understand, and you can look this up on the web, it's very easy to understand the logic of astrology, the geometry of astrology. Look up the word aspects in astrology. This is the sort of thing you'd be looking for. You'd be looking for aspects in astrology. And there's more than this, by the way. I just did the top 5 because it's a complicated topic anyway. I don't want to get you, afraid of what's going on with astrology, because it really is a fascinating, fun, entertaining, incredibly enlightening modality or tool. So I encourage you to do that. My website is chrisflisher.com. My other website is turningofthewheel.com. They both get to the same place, and I've got a podcast and obviously a television show. So look me up, Google me, hook me up, and I'll help you through your chart and teach you astrology so you can know and love it. Thanks.